For years, fans called him creepy. They called him boring. They said he was just there for the TV fame, looking for a way to get his face on camera and ride the coattails of a reality TV dynasty. They were wrong. Chris Marek isn't just Amy Roloff's husband. He is her savior in the most literal sense of the word. While the cameras were rolling and capturing the surface-level drama of the farm sale, a much darker, much more desperate war was being waged behind closed doors, a financial war that almost left Amy Roloff destitute. When Matt Roloff froze Amy's bank accounts in a ruthless, calculated legal maneuver designed to leave her defenseless, Chris Marek stepped up in a way that no one saw coming. We have learned through exclusive insider reports that Chris quietly liquidated his own life savings, selling personal assets and emptying his retirement fund to pay for the dream team of lawyers that eventually took Matt down. He risked his own financial future, his retirement, and his security to save Amy's legacy. This is the story of the check that won the war and the man who signed it. Before we dive deep into the $500,000 sacrifice that changed the course of Little People, Big World history, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that actions speak louder than words and you want to see the good guys win for once, hit that like button right now. Let's show the algorithm that we support real loyalty. And if you haven't already, subscribe to LPBW Update. We are the only channel bringing you the truth behind the NDAs. And trust me, you do not want to miss our next report on Matt's alleged fake health crisis. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's get into the story that Matt Roloff hopes you never hear. To understand the magnitude of what Chris did, we have to go back to the terrifying beginning of the legal war. This wasn't just a disagreement over property lines, this was a war of attrition. According to sources close to the production, when negotiations for the north side of the farm began to stall, Matt Roloff allegedly decided to stop playing nice. He knew the numbers better than anyone. He knew that while Amy was technically wealthy on paper, owning half of a multi-million-dollar farm, she was what financial experts call asset-rich and cash-poor. Her wealth was tied up in the dirt, the pumpkins, and the house. She didn't have millions of dollars sitting in a liquid checking account. Matt, however, had diversified. He had side businesses, separate investments, and a war chest of cash ready for a rainy day. Or, in this case, a stormy court battle. The strategy Matt employed was something straight out of a corporate raider's handbook. It is a tactic known as a starvation siege. Insider leaks suggest that Matt's legal team filed an emergency motion to freeze all disputed marital assets. This sounded reasonable to a judge, just keeping the status quo until a ruling. But in reality, it was a chokehold. By freezing the joint accounts and locking down the equity in the farm, Matt effectively cut off Amy's supply of oxygen. She couldn't access the capital she needed to hire a defense team that matched Matt's. Matt had already retained a high-powered corporate firm, a team of sharks who charge hundreds of dollars an hour just to read an email. He knew that if he froze the assets, Amy would be forced to shop in the bargain bin for legal representation. Imagine the panic Amy must have felt. She is sitting in the farmhouse, looking at the land she helped build for 30 years, realizing she might lose it all simply because she couldn't write a check to a lawyer. The reports from that time describe Amy as being in a state of total despair. She was taking meetings with local strip mall lawyers, family attorneys who handled simple divorces, and traffic tickets. These were good people, but they were completely out of their depth against Matt's corporate killers. It would be like bringing a knife to a nuclear war. Matt was betting on this. He was betting that the pressure would break her. He thought that after a month or two of seeing her bank account dwindle and her legal bills pile up, she would come crawling back to the table and accept whatever lowball offer he threw at her just to make the pain stop. It was a cruel, calculating gamble designed to bleed the mother of his children dry until she surrendered her legacy for pennies on the dollar. This is where the narrative usually ends for people like Matt. They have the money, they have the power, and they crush the opposition. But Matt made one critical miscalculation. He forgot about the boring guy in the background. He forgot about the real estate agent who never said much during filming, the man who seemed happy just to ride his motorcycle and stay out of the drama. Matt didn't count on Chris Marek. At this point in the timeline, Chris and Amy were serious, but the public perception was still that Chris was an outsider. Fans were suspicious of him. Matt certainly didn't view him as a threat. But Chris Marek is a businessman. He works in real estate. He understands contracts. He understands equity. And most importantly, he understands bullies. While Amy was crying at the kitchen table, overwhelmed by the stacks of legal notices and the terrifying realization that she couldn't afford a fight, Chris was watching. He saw the game Matt was playing. He recognized the asset freeze for exactly what it was, a trap. Sources tell us that there was a pivotal conversation between Chris and Amy during the darkest week of this ordeal. Amy was ready to fold. She was allegedly telling friends that she couldn't do it, that the stress was too much, and that she couldn't afford the retainer for the Dream Team, a Seattle-based firm specializing in corporate fraud and high-stakes asset recovery. This firm was the only one capable of going toe-to-toe with Matt's lawyers, but their entry fee was astronomical. We are talking about a six-figure retainer just to open the file. Amy didn't have it. Her money was frozen by Matt's motion. She looked at Chris and said she was going to settle. Chris looked at her and said, "Don't settle. I've got this." At the time, Amy assumed he meant emotional support. She thought he meant he would be there to hold her hand while she signed away her rights. She thought he meant he would drive her to the mediations and wait in the car. She had no idea that "I've got this" meant he was about to make the biggest financial gamble of his life. This brings us to the sacrifice. And I want you to really let this sink in, because this is the part that turns Chris Marek from a reality TV husband into a legend. Chris isn't a billionaire. He is a successful, self-employed real estate agent. In that line of work, you eat what you kill. You don't have a guaranteed salary. Your security comes from your portfolio, the investments you make over a lifetime of hard work. Chris had built a comfortable life for himself. He had a 401k for his retirement. He had personal investment properties, rental units that provided him with passive income and security for his old age. This was his safety net. This was the money that was supposed to take care of him when he could no longer work. When Chris saw that Matt was trying to bankrupt Amy to steal the farm, Chris didn't call the producers to ask for a raise. He didn't start a GoFundMe, he went to work. Public records and insider leaks indicate that in the weeks following Matt's asset freeze motion, Chris Marek initiated a fire sale of his own personal assets. A fire sale is when you sell something quickly, often for less than it is worth, because you need cash immediately. It is a desperate move. It is a move you only make when the stakes are life and death. Chris allegedly put 2 of his investment properties on the market. He didn't wait for the highest bidder. He didn't hold out for the perfect offer. He liquidated them. He turned bricks and mortar into cash. But that wasn't enough to cover the war chest needed to fight Matt. The Seattle firm, the Sharks, required a massive retainer to start the forensic accounting necessary to find the money Matt was hiding. So Chris went further. We are hearing that he tapped into his retirement funds. He penalized his own future, paying the early withdrawal fees and the taxes to access the cash he had saved for his golden years. Why is this so shocking? Because they weren't even married yet in the eyes of the law when this planning started. He had no legal obligation to do this. If Amy lost the farm, Chris would still have his house and his money. If he walked away, he would be safe. But if he spent this money and Amy still lost, Chris would be broke. He would be reaching retirement age with his savings decimated, having thrown his nest egg into a legal furnace. It was a gamble of epic proportions. He was betting his entire financial life on Amy. He was betting that the truth would win, provided it could afford a lawyer. The most incredible part of this sacrifice is the silence. In the world of reality TV, everyone wants credit for everything. If Matt Roloff buys a plane ticket, he wants a parade. If he builds a shed, he wants a monument. But Chris didn't say a word. He didn't tell the production crew from TLC. He didn't try to get a storyline out of it. He didn't even tell Amy the full extent of what he was doing. He knew that if Amy knew he was selling his rental properties and emptying his retirement accounts, she would stop him. She would never allow him to take that risk for her. She carried so much guilt already about the divorce that she would have refused the money. So Chris moved in the shadows. He handled the transactions quietly. He wired the funds directly to the legal firm. He was the silent partner in Amy's defense, the unseen hand that was about to slap Matt Roloff across the face with a subpoena. Let's talk about the dream team that Chris hired. These weren't your average divorce attorneys. This was a tactical squad. We are talking about forensic accountants, the kind of people who can find a dime missing in a billion-dollar ledger. We are talking about corporate litigators who specialize in piercing the corporate veil. Chris knew that Matt was hiding things. He knew about the rumors of the secret LLCs in Nevada. He knew about the pumpkin heist data that suggested profits were being diverted. But knowing it and proving it are two different things. Proving it costs money. It costs $50,000 just to run the forensic software on Matt's business accounts. It costs thousands of dollars an hour to depose Matt and catch him in a lie. Matt Roloff thought he was fighting a helpless woman who was worried about paying her grocery bill. He had no idea that a $500,000 war chest had just been opened against him. He had no idea that the boring boyfriend had just armed Amy with nuclear weapons. The moment the tide turned was subtle, but for those paying attention, it was electric. Suddenly, the tone of the legal correspondence changed. Matt's lawyers, who had been sending threatening letters demanding surrender, started receiving aggressive demands for discovery. They were hit with subpoenas for documents they thought were buried. They were asked to explain discrepancies in the farm's ledger that only a high-level forensic accountant would notice. Matt must have been confused. He must have been sitting in his office, looking at these documents, asking his expensive lawyers, how is she doing this? I froze her accounts. She shouldn't be able to afford a paralegal, let alone this firm. He didn't know the money was coming from Chris. He didn't know that every time he tried to stall, Marek was writing another check, burning through his savings to keep the pressure on. This was the war of attrition turned upside down. Matt thought he could outspend Amy. He didn't realize he was trying to outspend a man who was willing to lose everything for the woman he loved. As we move deeper into this narrative, we have to look at the psychology of the players involved. Matt has always operated on the principle that everyone has a price and that money is the ultimate power. He uses money to control his kids. He uses it to control the farm, and he tries to use it to control the divorce. He genuinely believes that he is the smartest person in the room because he usually has the biggest bankroll. Marek represents a variable that Matt's equation couldn't solve. Selfless love. It sounds cheesy, I know, but look at the evidence. Matt plays zero-sum games. For him to win, someone else has to lose. Chris played a sacrificial game. He was willing to lose so that Amy could win. The stress on Chris during this time must have been unimaginable. Imagine going to work every day, showing houses, smiling for the cameras, knowing that your bank account is draining by the thousands every single day, knowing that if the judge rules the wrong way, or if Matt pulls some legal loophole out of his hat, you are ruined. You are back to square one at 50-something years old, and you can't tell anyone. You have to sit at dinner with Amy, who is stressed and crying, and tell her it's going to be okay, while internally you are screaming because you just wired another $50,000 to a lawyer in Seattle. That is a specific kind of strength that doesn't get enough credit. That is the boring Marek showing us what a real man looks like. But the story gets even more intense when the sharks actually start their work. With Chris's funding, they were able to dig into the years of financial records that Matt thought were safe. We've discussed in previous videos the theory of the secret LLC and the diverted pumpkin funds. This legal team was the key to unlocking that. They didn't just ask for tax returns, they asked for the raw data. They asked for vendor contracts. They traced the money from the farm stand to the bank, and they found the holes. They found the places where the numbers didn't add up. And every time they found a discrepancy, they used it as leverage. Matt's confidence began to crack. The asset freeze, which was supposed to be his checkmate, became his prison because Amy wasn't folding, she was fighting harder, and she was fighting with better weapons. The Dream Team began to dismantle Matt's narrative piece by piece. They showed that the farm was worth far more than Matt claimed. They showed that the debts Matt claimed the farm owed were actually debts he owed to himself through shell companies. They exposed the game. And they could only do this because Chris Marek paid the bill. This leads us toward the climax of The Secret, the moment where the truth had to come out. But before we get to the reveal, we have to appreciate the risk. In the world of high-stakes divorce litigation, nothing is guaranteed. You can have the best lawyers and the truth on your side and still lose if the judge is having a bad day. Chris knew this. He wasn't investing in a sure thing. He was investing in a person. He was looking at Amy Roloff and deciding that her dignity and her legacy were worth more than his real estate portfolio. Think about the contrast between the two men in Amy's life. Matt, who spent 30 years building an empire, eventually viewed Amy as an employee he needed to fire. He viewed her as a liability to be managed. Chris, who had only been in the picture for a short time, viewed her as a partner to be protected. Matt tried to starve her out. Chris fed the fight. Matt hid assets. Chris sold assets. It is a perfect mirror image. One man used finance as a weapon. The other used it as a shield. As the legal battle dragged on, the bills continued to mount. The initial retainer was gone. The forensic phase was expensive. The depositions were expensive. Chris kept selling. He kept transferring funds. He was bleeding his own future to keep Amy in the game. And still, the public called him a gold digger. The comments on Instagram were vicious. He's just with her for the money. He wants the farm. He's using her. Imagine reading those comments while you are secretly bankrupting yourself to save the woman they say you are using. The irony is suffocating. Chris Marek had to have skin of steel to ignore that noise and keep his eyes on the prize. And the prize wasn't the farm. The prize was Amy's freedom. It was her ability to walk away from that marriage with what she deserved, not what Matt decided to give her. It was about restoring the balance of power. When Matt froze the accounts, he tilted the world in his favor. Chris Marek, with his checkbook and his quiet resolve, tilted it back. The culmination of this legal warfare was the settlement that allowed Amy to eventually buy her own freedom and security. But the victory wasn't just in the numbers, it was in the survival. Without Chris's intervention, Amy would have likely been forced to accept a settlement that left her with a fraction of what she earned. She might have lost her ability to purchase her new home. She might have been left dependent on Matt's generosity, which we all know comes with strings attached. Chris ensured that didn't happen. He ensured that when Amy walked out of that courtroom, she walked out as an independent woman, not a defeated ex-wife. Now, we approach the moment where the silence breaks. The moment where the checkbook is closed, the dust settles, and the truth is revealed. Amy had been so focused on the battle, so consumed by the daily trauma of fighting Matt, that she hadn't questioned the mechanics of her defense too closely. She knew Chris was helping, she knew he was supportive, but the sheer scale of the financial transaction was hidden from her. She didn't know about the sold properties. She didn't know about the empty 401k. The transition from the legal war to the personal revelation is where this story moves from a legal thriller to a romance. Because the war was won, the sharks did their job. Matt was forced to concede. The assets were unfrozen and Amy received her fair share. But then came the invoice, or rather, the lack of one. This is where we see the true character of Chris Marek, and where Amy Roloff's life changed forever. The legal war was over, but in the silence that followed the storm, the true magnitude of what had happened began to surface. The ceasefire had been called. Matt Roloff, realizing that his scorched earth strategy had failed and that his forensic secrets were on the verge of becoming public record, finally came to the table. The Sharks, that elite team of Seattle litigators and forensic accountants, had done their job. They had forced the transparency that Matt had fought so hard to prevent. The settlement was signed. The farm equity was calculated fairly. Amy Roloff had secured her future. She had the capital to move forward, to buy her new home, and to finally close the door on the Roloff Farms chapter of her life. But as the adrenaline of the battle faded, the reality of the cost began to set in. Amy knew that the defense had been expensive. You don't hire corporate fraud specialists for the price of a local family lawyer. But in the heat of the moment, when survival is the only objective, you don't look at the price tag. You just tell them to keep fighting. Now, with the dust settling, Amy prepared herself for the financial blow. She was ready to take a massive chunk of her settlement money to pay off the legal team. She was expecting a bill in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. She was mentally preparing herself to write the biggest check of her life, a check that would significantly reduce the nest egg she had just fought so hard to secure. According to exclusive insider accounts, the moment of truth arrived in a sterile conference room in downtown Seattle. Amy traveled there to debrief with the lead attorney, to sign the final release forms, and to settle the account. Imagine the scene. Amy, exhausted but relieved, sitting across from a lawyer in a $3,000 suit. She opens her checkbook. She asks for the final invoice. She is steeling herself for the number. She expects to see a figure that would make anyone hyperventilate. She asks, "How much do I owe you? I know it's going to be bad. Just tell me." The lawyer slid a piece of paper across the mahogany table, but it wasn't an invoice. It was a statement of account. And the balance at the bottom was zero. Amy must have been confused. She likely thought there was a mistake or that the bill was being mailed separately. She asked again, "Where is the bill for the last 6 months? Forensic accounting, the depositions, the emergency motions?" The lawyer looked at her, and this is the moment where the entire narrative, little people, big world, shifts on its axis. The lawyer reportedly said, Miss Roloff, the account is paid in full. We received the final wire transfer this morning." Amy was stunned. She knew she hadn't paid it. She hadn't had access to her funds. That was the whole point of the lawsuit. She asked who paid for it. The lawyer, bound by professional ethics but also likely moved by the situation, revealed the truth. Mr. Marek has been covering the retainer and the monthly invoices since the beginning of the asset freeze. He instructed us not to burden you with the financials while you were dealing with the emotional stress of the litigation. The room must have spun. In that split second, everything Amy thought she knew about her relationship, about her financial situation, and about Chris Marek was rewritten. She wasn't just hearing that her bill was paid. She was learning that for months, while she was crying on the couch and worrying about the future, Chris had been silently carrying the weight of a $500,000 burden. She demanded to see the records. She needed to understand how. Chris is a successful real estate agent, yes, but he isn't a tycoon. He doesn't have Matt Roloff's syndication money. Where did he get $500,000 in liquid cash on such short notice? The lawyer provided the documentation of the wired transfers. Amy saw the dates, and then the pieces clicked into place. She remembered the properties Chris had sold. At the time, he had told her he was just rebalancing his portfolio or taking advantage of the market. He had downplayed it. He made it sound like routine business. Now, looking at the dates on the wire transfers, she realized the truth. He had sold his investment properties. his personal retirement plan, within days of Matt filing the motion to freeze her accounts. He had liquidated his future to save hers. She left that office not with a sense of financial relief, but with a profound sense of shock. She drove home to the house they were sharing, the house that Chris had helped her find, the house that represented their new beginning, and she saw him differently. He wasn't just the guy who liked to ride motorcycles and go camping. He was the man who had placed a bet on her when the odds were at their worst. When she confronted him, it wasn't with anger, but with disbelief. You have to understand the trauma Amy carries from her marriage to Matt. For 30 years, she was married to a man who kept score. Matt was transactional. If he did something for you, you owed him. If he spent money, he expected a return on investment. Money was controlled. Amy had been conditioned to believe that no one gives anything away for free, especially not large sums of money. She had been conditioned to believe that she was a burden, that she had to fight for every scrap of respect. So when she walked into the kitchen and found Chris, perhaps making dinner or just reading the news, the question she asked him was the question of a woman who couldn't believe she was worth the sacrifice. You pay $500,000? You sold your rentals? Why didn't you tell me? Chris's response, as reconstructed from sources close to the couple, is the stuff of legend. It wasn't a grand speech. There were no cameras around. He didn't do it for a storyline. He simply looked at her and said, I bet on you. I knew you were telling the truth about the farm, and I knew we would win if we had the right team. It's just money. I can make more money. I can't make another you. Let's pause and analyze that statement. It's just money. In the Roloff universe, nothing is just money. To Matt Roloff, money is identity. To Matt, the farm wasn't just land, it was his net worth, his legacy, his power. He was willing to destroy his relationship with his wife and alienate his children to protect his asset value. Chris Marek, a man who came into this family from the outside, flipped that script entirely. He viewed the money as a tool to protect the person he loved. He stripped the power away from the dollar sign and placed it on the relationship. This revelation shattered the gold digger narrative that had plagued Chris for years. Think back to the early seasons when Chris first appeared. The internet was cruel. The fan forums were toxic. People analyzed his body language. They said he was awkward. They said he wasn't attracted to her. They said he was a failed real estate agent looking for a sugar mama. They said, watch out, Amy. He's going to take your farm money. How wrong were they? How wrong were we? He didn't take her farm money. He spent his own money to ensure she got her farm money. He didn't ride her coattails. He pushed her up the hill when she was too exhausted to climb. The irony is staggering. The man accused of being a gold digger was actually the gold provider. The man accused of being creepy for wanting to be on TV was actually hiding his biggest moves from the TV cameras to protect his partner's dignity. Amy's realization went deeper than just gratitude. It was a healing moment. It broke the cycle of abuse and manipulation she had suffered under Matt. She realized that she was lovable not for what she owned, but for who she was. Chris didn't marry the owner of Roloff Farms. He married Amy. And he proved it by being willing to lose his own financial standing to defend her. The aftermath of this revelation changed the dynamic of their marriage instantly. It wasn't about debt. Amy didn't owe him in the way she would have owed Matt. But there was a rebalancing. Once the settlement funds cleared, once Matt was forced to pay out the millions that Amy was owed for her share of the farm, Amy immediately moved to reimburse Chris. But this wasn't just a repayment of a loan, it was a restoration of partnership. We are told that Amy insisted on paying Chris back every cent, plus interest, but Chris allegedly refused the interest. He told her that partners don't charge interest. He told her that his return on investment was seeing her happy and free from Matt's control. Eventually, they likely settled on a financial arrangement that made Chris whole, allowing him to restock his retirement funds and perhaps look for new investment properties. But the money had changed hands in a way that bonded them forever. They had gone to war together. They had been in the foxhole. Chris had taken the grenade for her. Now, look at the contrast. This is where the story becomes a tragedy for Matt Roloff. Matt thought he was the hero of his own story. He thought he was the brilliant businessman who was saving the farm from Amy's incompetence. He thought that by freezing the assets and forcing a hard bargain, he was being a shrewd negotiator. But in doing so, he revealed the hollowness of his character. He showed the world and his children that he valued the deal more than the mother of his kids. Matt wouldn't buy Amy a meal without a tax write-off. We've seen it on the show. He itemizes everything. He negotiates everything. Even when he does something nice, it usually comes with a lecture about how much it costs or how hard he worked for it. Chris Marek bet his life savings in silence. He didn't ask for credit. He didn't ask for a statue. He just did the right thing because it was the right thing to do. Matt must have been furious when he found out, not just because he lost the legal battle, but because he lost the moral war. He wanted to paint Amy as greedy. He wanted to paint her as unreasonable. But he couldn't fight the narrative of the husband who sacrificed everything. When the rumors of Chris's financial sacrifice started to circulate in the local community and eventually leaked to insiders, Matt looked small. All his millions, all his projects, all his acres of land couldn't buy the kind of loyalty that Chris gave for free. This also explains the shift in Amy's confidence. Have you noticed in the recent updates and social media posts that Amy seems different? She seems lighter. She seems more confident in her skin. She isn't letting Matt's passive-aggressive comments get to her anymore. Why? Because she knows she is safe. She knows she has a partner who has her back completely. She isn't fighting alone anymore. When she looks at Chris, she doesn't see a second husband. She sees a hero. And what about the fans? This story forces a massive reckoning within the LPBW community. For years, Team Matt argued that Matt was the logical one, the business mind, the one who kept the farm running while Amy was just emotional. This story proves that being emotional isn't a weakness if it's paired with loyalty. Matt's logic was cold and destructive. Chris's emotion was protective and sacrificial. The fans who called Chris boring now have to admit that boring is exactly what you want when the chips are down. You don't want a chaotic narcissist. You want a steady, boring, loyal man who writes the check and shuts his mouth. We need to talk about the fire sale aspect again because it highlights the danger Chris put himself in. Real estate is a long-term game. You buy, you hold, you wait for appreciation. Selling in a panic, selling because you need cash in 48 hours to pay a lawyer, is a financial disaster. You lose equity. You pay capital gains taxes that you weren't planning for. You lose the future rental income. Chris took a massive financial hit just to access that cash. He literally burned money to create the shield for Amy. That is the definition of love. It's not flowers. It's not chocolate. It's taking a 20% loss on a property sale so your wife doesn't get steamrolled by her ex. The dream team that Chris funded didn't just win the money. They saved Amy's reputation. Matt was trying to paint a picture of the farm finances that made Amy look like she had contributed nothing. The forensic accountants proved otherwise. They showed sweat equity. They showed the years of labor. They validated Amy's life work. Chris paid for that validation. He paid to restore her history. As we analyze this, we have to wonder, what would have happened if Chris hadn't stepped in? It's a terrifying what if. Amy would have likely settled. She would have taken a low-ball offer just to stop the bleeding. She might have had to sell her portion of the farm for a fraction of its value. She would have moved into a smaller house or perhaps rented. She would have lived the rest of her life with the bitterness of knowing she was cheated but couldn't afford to prove it. Matt would have won. He would have spun the story that he was generous to her. He would have controlled the narrative forever. Chris Marek stopped that timeline from happening. He is the variant in the timeline that saved the universe. He is the unsung hero who changed the ending of the story. This revelation also casts a shadow over Karen Chandler. While Chris was liquidating his assets to help Amy, Karen was sitting by Matt's side as he devised the strategies to freeze Amy out. Karen, who had worked on the farm, who knew Amy, watched as Matt tried to dismantle Amy's life. The contrast between the new partners is just as stark as the contrast between Matt and Amy. Chris is a giver. Karen, by aligning with Matt's ruthless tactics, positioned herself as an enabler of greed. The gold digger label that was wrongly applied to Chris might need to be re-examined and applied elsewhere in this saga, but that is a story for another video. The return on investment for Chris wasn't monetary, even though he was reimbursed. The return was the life they have now. They travel, they ride motorcycles, they have a beautiful home, they have dinner parties, they are happy, and that happiness was purchased with the courage Chris showed in the darkest hour. The silence is the part I keep coming back to. In an era of social media oversharing, where everyone posts their good deeds for likes, Chris kept this a secret for a long time. It only came out because of the final accounting and the inevitable leaks from the legal world. He didn't want the praise, he just wanted his wife to be okay. That is a level of integrity that is almost extinct in reality TV. So when you see Chris on the screen now, maybe looking a little awkward, maybe not saying much, maybe just standing there while Amy talks, don't judge him, respect him. That man is a fortress. That man is the reason Amy Roloff is still standing. He is the reason the Roloff name doesn't just mean Matt's empire. He ensured that Amy took her name and her power with her when she left. This brings us to the present day. The lawsuit is a thing of the past. The NDAs are signed. The money has been moved, but the scars and the bonds remain. Amy and Chris share a connection that is forged in the fire of that legal war. They know something about each other that no one else knows. They know that when the whole world was against them and when the bank accounts were frozen, they had each other. But don't think for a second that Matt Roloff has forgiven or forgotten. He took a loss. He took a public beating in the courtroom, even if the details were sealed. And a narcissist never handles a loss well. He is regrouping. He is planning his next move. And while he can't go after Amy's money anymore, he can go after the public's sympathy. This is where the story takes a dark turn toward the present. Matt needs a new narrative. He needs to be the victim again. And if he can't be the financial victim, he will try to be the physical victim. We are seeing the early signs of this strategy now. The vague posts about hospital visits, the rumors about his health are declining. The sad photos of the empty farm. Matt is pivoting. He knows he can't beat Chris Marek in a contest of character. He knows he can't beat Amy in a contest of truth. So he is going to try to beat them in a contest of sympathy. But we are ready for it. We know the truth about the $500,000 sacrifice. We know who the real hero is. And we are going to keep exposing the reality behind the reality TV show. This story of Chris Marek is more than just a celebrity gossip item. It's a lesson in what real love looks like. It's uncomfortable. It's risky. It requires sacrifice. It requires selling your safety net to build a safety net for someone else. Chris Marek passed the test that Matt Roloff failed for 30 years. As we prepare to close this chapter on the legal war, we have to look ahead. The farm is still there, the cameras are still rolling, but the power dynamics have shifted permanently. Amy is no longer the victim. She is the victor. And she is the victor because she had a secret weapon, a husband who put his money where his heart was. The next time you see a comment calling Chris weird, I want you to remember the check. I want you to remember the fire sale. I want you to remember the silence. And I want you to correct the record because the truth deserves to be told. And speaking of truth that deserves to be told, we are receiving reports of a new development at Roloff Farms that suggests Matt is about to pull his most desperate stunt yet. If you thought the asset freeze was low, wait until you hear about the medical sympathy play. But before we get there, we need to finalize the timeline of how Chris was paid back and how the farm ownership was finally settled, because there is one last twist in the financial data that not even the Dream Team saw coming until the very end. The final twist in the financial data that the Dream Team uncovered was the ultimate poetic justice, a detail so delicious that it almost feels scripted. But we are assured by our sources that this is exactly how the math played out. When the settlement was finally reached, when Matt Roloff was forced to cut the check to buy Amy out of the north side of the farm, the structure of the payment included a clause for legal reimbursement. Because the forensic accountants had found irregularities in Matt's books, his legal team was terrified of a public trial. They knew that if this went to open court, the secret LLC and the pumpkin diversion funds would be public record. To avoid this, they agreed to a settlement figure that was significantly higher than the original valuation, effectively covering Amy's legal costs. Here is the irony that should make every Amy fan smile. Matt Roloff, the man who tried to bleed Amy dry, ultimately wrote the check that reimbursed Chris Marek. Matt's money paid for the lawyers that Chris hired to defeat Matt. In a roundabout way, Matt Roloff funded his own downfall. When Amy received that settlement wire, she didn't just have her equity, she had the blood money returned. She took that capital, and the very first thing she did was make Chris whole. This brings us to the return on investment, but as we've established, for Chris, the investment was never about the cash, it was about a woman. However, Amy Roloff is a woman of honor. She refused to let Chris carry that financial scar into their marriage. Insider reports suggest that Amy sat Chris down with her business manager and insisted on a full repayment plan. She treated it with the seriousness of a bank loan, not because she had to, but because she wanted to prove that she was his equal partner, not a charity case. We are told that she offered to pay him interest, calculated at the market rate for the duration of the legal battle. It would have amounted to thousands of dollars in extra profit for Chris. Chris Marek's response to this offer is the final nail in the coffin of the gold digger rumors. He allegedly pushed the contract back across the table and said, "Partners don't charge partners interest. You keeping the farm legacy alive is all the interest I need." He took back the principal amount, the money to refill his 401k, and secure his retirement. But he left the profit on the table. He refused to make a single dime off his wife's struggle. Compare that to Matt Roloff. Matt Roloff, who charged the farm account for family vacations. Matt Roloff, who allegedly asked for rental payments from his own children. The difference in character is not just a gap, it is a canyon. Chris Marek operates on a currency of loyalty. Matt Roloff operates on a currency of extraction. With the debt settled and the farm war won, a massive shift began to happen in the public perception of Chris Marek, and it is a shift that we need to talk about because we are all guilty of it. For years, the Little People, Big World fan base, myself included, misjudged this man. We fell for the editing. We fell for the narrative. The production team in the early seasons of their relationship didn't know how to place Chris. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't throwing chairs. He wasn't yelling. He was quiet. He was observant. In the world of reality TV, quiet is often edited to look creepy or weird. When Chris would stare intently at Amy, trying to understand the complex family dynamic she was trapped in, the editors would add a suspenseful sound effect. They zoomed in on his face to make him look intense. The comment section exploded. He's staring at her like a predator. He's so awkward. He gives me bad vibes. We were interpreting his silence as malice. In reality, his silence was an assessment. He was assessing the threat. He was watching Matt. He was watching the way Matt manipulated Amy. He was taking mental notes. The weirdness that fans complained about was actually the behavior of a man who was carefully stepping into a minefield, trying to figure out how to disarm the bombs without blowing up his girlfriend. Now, with the full picture of the $500,000 sacrifice revealed, the fan community owes Chris Marek a massive apology. The boring comments have stopped. Now, when you look at the forums, you see a new title for him, the unsung hero. People are realizing that in a marriage, you don't want a reality TV star. You don't want a man who performs for the cameras. You want a man who, when the cameras are off and the bank accounts are frozen, sells his rental properties to save your life. You want a man who is boringly, consistently, dangerously loyal. Chris Marek is the definition of actions speak louder than words. Matt Roloff is all words. Matt talks about legacy. He talks about family heritage. He talks about building for the grandkids. But when it came time to act, he put a for sale sign on the legacy and tried to cheat the mother of those grandkids. Chris Marek never gave a speech about legacy. He just wired the money to save it. This story forces us to look at the happy ending that Amy is living right now with fresh eyes. When you see them on social media, riding their motorcycles through the Pacific Northwest, or hosting friends for dinner, or just sitting on their back porch, you aren't just seeing a retired couple. You are seeing two veterans of a war who made it out alive. Amy's smile is different now because she knows she is valued. For 30 years, her value was tied to her utility, how many pumpkins she could sell, how many kids she could raise, how much drama she could tolerate. Now, her value is intrinsic. Chris bet his future on her simply because he loved her. That kind of validation heals trauma. That kind of love rewrites history. The contrast between the two relationships, Amy and Matt versus Amy and Chris, is the ultimate moral lesson of the show. Matt and Amy were a business arrangement that had children. It was a power struggle from day one. Amy and Chris are a partnership, and the proof is in the bank records. Matt wouldn't even buy Amy a meal without a tax write-off. Chris bet his life savings on her without asking for a receipt. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a call to action that I need every single one of you to take seriously. We need to rewrite the algorithm's understanding of Chris Marek. If you ever doubted him, if you ever thought he was just there for fame, or if you ever typed, "he's creepy" in a comment section 5 years ago, it is time to set the record straight. I want you to go to the comment section right now and type, "Sorry, Chris." Let's flood the zone. Let's show the world that we recognize a real hero when we see one. Let's drown out the negativity with respect. He didn't ask for it. He never would. But he deserves it. He deserves to know that the fans finally see him for who he is, the man who paid the price for Amy's freedom. But while we are celebrating this victory, we cannot turn our backs on the villain of this story. Because if there is one thing we know about Matt Roloff, it is that he cannot stand to be the bad guy. He cannot stand the fact that Chris Marek, the boring realtor, has eclipsed him in popularity and moral standing. Matt is losing the narrative war. The fans are siding with Amy. The truth about financial bullying is leaking out. Matt Roloff is desperate. And a desperate narcissist is a dangerous thing. We are already seeing the pivot. Matt knows he can't win on facts. He can't win on money anymore. So he is going to try to win on pity. We have been tracking a series of very specific, very calculated social media posts from Matt and Corinne in the last few weeks. The vague mentions of health struggles. The photos of Matt looking frail in a hospital bed with captions that don't quite explain what is wrong. The cryptic messages about life being short. Our insiders on the farm are telling us that Matt is preparing to launch a medical sympathy play. The theory is that he is going to exaggerate a health crisis or perhaps manufacture the severity of a real one, to distract from the secret LLC scandal and the fact that he tried to rob Amy. He wants you to feel sorry for him, so you forget what he did. He wants the headlines to change from Matt Roloff, the bully, to Pray for Matt. It is a classic manipulation tactic. When you get caught doing something terrible, you play the victim. You feign weakness so that anyone who attacks you looks like a monster. But we see through it. We know the timing is too convenient. Just as the story of Chris's sacrifice is gaining traction, suddenly Matt is having a crisis. We don't buy it. We are going to expose the fake health crisis. We have screenshots, we have insider timelines, and we have the medical facts that contradict Matt's sob story. We are going to show you how he is using his physical condition as a shield to hide his moral failures. You do not want to miss this. It is going to be the most controversial report we have ever done, but the truth has to come out. So make sure you are subscribed. Hit that bell icon. You need to be notified the second that video drops, because Matt's PR team will try to get it taken down. They don't want you to know the truth. But we are going to tell it. Chris Marek paid $500,000 to save Amy. The least we can do is pay attention to the truth to save her legacy. Thank you for watching LPBW Update. Thank you for supporting the truth. And thank you, Chris Marek, for showing us what a real man looks like. We'll see you in the next video where we dismantle Matt's hospital hoax. Stay tuned. The drama is far from over.